the top 150 science fiction novels of all time. You know this is going to be on there. But does this deserve to be? I can tell you this is going to be on the list. But should this be on there? Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is an absolute classic and an excellent read. This is on the list. But what about these old guys? Should they be on the list? Hi, I'm Michael Everts, and you're watching Fit to be Read. Thank you for watching today. Why do a top 150 list? Because it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's interesting. These lists, they're easy to digest. And let's face it, we love statistics. We love these lists, top 10 lists, top 100 lists, and yes, top 150 lists. It aids discovery. You know, there's going to be 150 books on this top 150 list. So maybe you're going to see some books there that you haven't heard of before, and maybe now you have some new titles to add to your reading list. It encourages debate. Let's encourage some debate right now. Go down to the comment section and just off the top of your head, let me hear your top 10 science fiction books, your top 5, your top 3. Let's see where we disagree and let's see where we agree, and maybe we have some commonality. And again, let's encourage some debate. I'm doing something a little different this episode. I don't have a book review or a tag or a wrap up today. I'm talking about an upcoming project, and if you haven't guessed it already, I am working on a top 150 science fiction list. Why am I doing this list? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I really want to do it, and I think it would be a lot of fun, and it's been a great activity for me. I've been working on this for about the past month. 150 became the number I settled at, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Another reason I did this, it's for you, the viewers. Of course it's all for you. But seriously, I do look at this as something that I want to give out and put out to YouTube and to BookTube as a resource. And I don't mean that to be pretentious. I just think that I've read a lot of science fiction. I love science fiction. If you've watched some of my reviews, you can tell I'm pretty passionate about things that I read and I like to read. So I look at this list a couple of ways. One is I could see it as really being a resource for folks who really love science fiction. And there are people who have read a lot more science fiction than I've read. I've read a lot, but I don't doubt that there are many who have read a lot more than I have. There are people who've grown up in a different time than I grew up and probably were reading a lot of science fiction that I haven't even heard of. Many have read a lot more science fiction than I have, and I've read a lot more science fiction than many. I like to see this list as maybe a resource for those who've read a lot of science fiction, who maybe in my list have found some ideas for things that maybe they weren't aware of or they haven't read, and yay, they found something else that they can take a look at and add to their TBR and round out their list of science fiction reading. Then I also think of those who have just kind of stumbled into science fiction or are new to science fiction completely or have been reading for just a little while and are really hungry for more and are curious about what else is out there. I think this list could be a resource for that too. I'm not going to review every book on this list. 150 books, that would be insane. The video would be, I don't know, 3-4 hours long if I did that. I'm not going to do that. And then why 150? Well, you know, I could have done 100. I could have done 200. I think for me, when I was kind of paring down and I got to around 150, that's when it got really hard for me to keep things out of the 150. So I thought that would be a good place to stop. And I think about, you know, top 10s that I see a lot. On Facebook, I'm on like 10 different reading type groups, science fiction groups, just general books and book recommendation groups, Facebook reading groups and things like that. And there's often like top 10s, or people will ask, well, who are your top 10 or your top 5? And sometimes when you read those lists, and this is with no judgment, you know, everybody is just all subjective and people read what they read. There's no gatekeeping here. There's no, I'm better than anybody else because I've read more books than you. In science fiction, I've read a lot of books. Outside of science fiction, I've read a lot of books, but nowhere near what a lot of people who are big readers read. So in no means is this me knocking people who have not read as much science fiction as I've read. I'm in a lot of these groups, and I often see these top 10 lists, and you might have 100 people respond on a top 10 list, and some of them are really interesting titles. And again, with no judgment, I see lists that it seems like, maybe this person read 20 books and here's the top 10 out of the 20. So you look at the context. There's nothing wrong with that. If I've read 10 books, I can just put a list out of the 10 books and put them in an order. And that's my ranking of all of the books that I've read. And there's nothing wrong with that. For me, though, I do wonder when I see some of those lists, I don't know the context. Did this person read 10 books and these are their 10 favorite books? Or is this somebody who's read a lot and here is the cream of the crop of all these many books that they've read? So I want to give a little context for this, that I've read a lot of science fiction. 150, even being number 150 on this list, means that it's probably a good book because of where I started from. That gets me to the next topic in this episode, which is how. How did I come up with this list? So the first thing that I did was I looked at what have I read in science fiction, and I had to do a few things here. I had to obviously go back to the shelves and look at everything that I've been reading. And I went down into these drawers too, which have the stuff that isn't out on the shelf, because some of those are in the top 150 as well. Then there's a lot of stuff I've read that I just don't have copies of, or I read a long time ago. And as I did that, I came up with a list of getting close to around 400. And I just decided to stop it there, because if I hadn't thought about it by then, and this was over a course of like 2 or 3 weeks, it probably wasn't going to be something that was going to make it into the top list. So I pared that list down as much as I could. I got down to around 160, and then I started thinking, like, I don't want to have a top 160 list, so do I have like a tie for 10 of them at 150? And I don't want to do that either. So I was able to narrow it down to 150. There might be a tie or two in there. So that's the first part of the how. The next is, what are the rules for this thing? And I thought about series, for example, because I was starting to think of like some of my favorites, and I was getting into Ender's Game series and the Culture series and the Foundation series. And, in the top 50, if you get down to that like top 10, top 20, top 30 area, it starts to get really crowded. I was sort of, getting these books together, and it actually didn't take me that long to get a general ranking of my top 150. That didn't take me long at all. But then I did have to kind of arrange things a little bit, because I saw that I was putting books at first, like not giving them a number, but book is in the top 20, this is in the top 30, because I thought maybe they were top 10, but maybe the top 10 would get too crowded, so I'll just put a generic top 20. Well, I had like 40 or 50 books that all had top 20 next to them, so I had to really narrow it down. But then I was thinking about series, because I had a ton of them in, the Culture series, Foundation series, like I said, Ender series, and how many from Banks in that series, the Culture series, are going to be on that list? Do I want to crowd out the top 30 with 3 of them being from Culture series and 4 of them from Foundation and 6 of them from Ender's Game? That's just not realistic. So what I did was I'm trying to limit it to 2 entries per series. And if there's going to be a third, there has to be a really good reason for it. For example, Foundation series, do I have Foundation and Empire in there as 2 separate entries, or do I just combine them as one and say, okay, this is the Foundation series and rank it there? But then we've got Foundation's Edge, which is further into the series, but that's a book that Asimov wrote decades after the original trilogy, and did so, with pressure or enticement from publishers and the fan base. So can that be judged as a separate novel? So I got to figure that out. Would there be 3 from Foundation? Then in Foundation, you've got Benford, Brin, Bear, all who wrote after Asimov had passed, and they got permission from the estate to continue on the series, and they did really interesting books, which they're not going to be in the top 10, but are they in the top 150? Maybe they are. How do we treat that? So I think what I'm going to do is, these 2 will probably go in as 1 entry. Yes, they are different novels. Yes, to me, this is the superior novel, but so maybe I'll be ranking it based on this. You will have to wait and see. Then I had to be sure to not overrepresent authors. But how do you do that? Because this list, and I should clarify at this point, I was going to clarify that a little bit later, but I think at this point, let's be clear. This list is going to be the top 150 science fiction novels that I like. This is not the best 150 science fiction novels ever written, or the top 150 must-read novels ever. It is my favorites. What did I enjoy the most? What did I have the most positive reaction to. And I'll speak a little bit more about that in this episode as well. But overrepresented authors, I wanted to be careful that because of love I have for authors like Banks and Asimov and Stevenson and Gibson and Egan, brilliant authors who've done great, brilliant work, I don't want to rank things higher on the list that they've done because of my affinity and affection for those authors. So, and that's actually hard to do because it's easy to say, okay, you can just separate, did I like the book or am I liking the author? It does cloud it a little bit. I could read a book that is really good and rank it a little higher, thinking that I liked it more than something else, but I'm putting a little bit more of, wow, I just love this author so much. But again, it comes down to what is my favorite, and that's kind of how I'm ranking these things. So, but I do want to make sure that, you know, if I have 8 novels from Greg Egan, they all deserve to be on that list, and they're not just on that list because I love Greg Egan, and I think his work is brilliant. Being brilliant is part of enjoying the book, but again, I'm reminding myself, I'm not just ranking things based on are they well-written science fiction, but how much do I like them? How much did I enjoy them? By the same token, I want to make sure that I'm being fair to authors who are giants in the genre. I'm thinking of Heinlein and Clarke. These are behemoths in the world of science fiction, but some of their work has not aged very well. I'm going through right now a reread of Stranger in a Strange Land, and this is actually interesting. Okay, I'm not having any rules in this video right now, it's just kind of talking about what I'm working on, but I'm reading Stranger in a Strange Land, and consecutively, or concurrently, I'm also reading Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge. Vinge. And they're both good novels, but it's interesting because I had them both on this list because I've been reading these each for about 3 weeks now. Because I'm reading them concurrently, it's taking me longer to read each one than it would if I was just reading them obviously by themselves. And where they were on the list is changing. Stranger in a Strange Land, because of where I remembered the experience of reading it, was higher on the list than it is now. As I read it, I am enjoying it, but relative to the list of 150, it's little by little moving down the list. It's still going to be on the list of 150, so if you're a Heinlein fan and you're getting anxious right now, relax, it's still on there, but it's kind of drifting down the list. And Fire Upon the Deep, which is a brilliant novel and very, very enjoyable, I didn't remember how enjoyable. And it was still in a good spot on the list, but it's inching up the list a little bit. So they're sort of like doing this sort of thing, and that's kind of fun. So it's interesting to see that happen. But the reason I was bringing up Heinlein and Clarke is things that are dated are tough ones, because if I haven't read them in a while, I am probably judging them a little bit more on my experience having read them previously. And so I have to rely on memory a little bit. There's going to be a lot of books here that I haven't read in a long time, and I haven't gotten to new rereads of them yet. If I were to reread them, they might move way down the list or way up the list or off the list completely. I don't think that's going to happen with this. I don't think that's going to happen with this group, but it could. But again, I'm making this list based on what are my feelings right now of the books I've read that are my favorites. So some of the stuff by Edgar Rice Burroughs, Theodore Sturgeon, Hal Clement, those things could be a little higher on the list, whereas my guess is if I read them again now, I'm probably not going to have the same enjoyment or appreciation of them, and that's okay. I can always do another 150 top science fiction favorites again later once I've gotten through that. You know, speaking of Heinlein, I also want to speak about problematic authors. Not that I'm calling him a problematic author, but in some of his work there are things like, especially in Stranger in a Strange Land, there's some stuff in there about how men and women interact that feels very dated, and that's definitely moved the book down a little bit on my list just because that does affect my enjoyment of it. But then I also think about Orson Scott Card in the Ender series. Now, that series could have a ton, and the Shadow series could have a ton if you put everything in the series on the list. But Ender's Game for sure is, you know, one of the top classic science fiction novels of all time. Now, do I say that because Orson Scott Card is a terrible homophobe and tried to stop gay people from getting married, which is a terrible thing? Does that mean that Ender's Game is banned from being on the list? No, it doesn't, because I'm not ranking authors right now and I'm not making commentary on that. I'm not silent about it either. I think it is terrible, and I think Orson Scott Card is not a good person. I don't like him. I think he is virulently homophobic, and I'm fully disclosing that. I'm separating the work from the artist, and I don't think that work is his anymore, in the sense of when you read that story, you have the experience for yourself, and whoever the author is has nothing to do with that. Whether you want to read more of their work or not is a different story. When I'm talking about what were my favorite books of all time to read, Ender's Game is going to be on that list, and I'll just leave it at that. And I'll elaborate. When I say my favorite science fiction books of all time, I am, yes, talking about how much did I enjoy one book versus another. But when I say enjoy, it doesn't just mean how much did I enjoy the book when I read it and what was that experience like. That's obviously probably the biggest part of it, but it also has to do with, did I appreciate the prose? Did I find the work to be brilliant? Did it impact my life in some way? Did it evoke emotion? All of those things play into whether or not I enjoyed a book. You know, did I think about the book a month later, or I forgot it? That impacts the rankings on this list as well. You know, I think about books like Foundation, which is already going to be high on the list, but I did enjoy that book immensely when I read it, but I also appreciate it for the interest it gave me initially in science fiction and how that impacted my life. Speaker for the Dead is something that really reached me deep down. That is impactful beyond just, I enjoyed reading that book a lot. The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu, the sequel to The Three Body Problem, that was a very good book, and I love the experience of reading it. But it also changed the way that I view first contact and who we are in the universe, and that's important, and that plays into where I'm going to rank this book. 1984, Brave New World. I like those books a lot, but even more than how much I like them, in terms of the reading experience, they impacted my life a lot in how I view the world. And again, that weighs heavily in terms of where I'm going to place them when I'm ranking them on this list. Like versus best. Some of these books are things that I really, really like. It doesn't mean they're the best. I don't think that Linda Nagata's Red Trilogy is the strongest writing ever. It's not bad writing, so I'm not going at that. I don't have my words. I think the writing in this is very good, but if I was ranking based on the best science fiction of all time, taking my favorites out of it and just what is the most solid and valuable and important, well-written, and I'll have to come up with a variety of other categories to describe what makes something a great science fiction book, I don't think this will rank as high on that list as it does on this list. I think it will be top 50 on both lists, but on this list, it's higher because of the enjoyment I got from it. So if there's anything unclear about that, jump into the comments and ask me, and I'll clarify more, but I think I'm beating a dead horse at this point. Speaking also to how am I going to film this video? What's it going to look like? I just did a wrap-up that was 35 or 40 books of what I've read between January and July, and that video is an hour, I think it's an hour and 5 minutes long, and that's just 40 books. If I talk as much about each book on this 150 list as I did on that wrap-up, you're easily looking at a 2-hour video. That's not going to happen. So what I'm going to do is, I think I want to mention the name of the book, the author, of course, probably the year that it was written, and then maybe 2, 3, or at the most 4 things about each book. And I'm going to have to do it in like 10 or 15 seconds. I think just a little blurb about each book. This isn't meant to be a review of each thing. And even though I'm talking about this being sort of a resource, I still think you get that. Like, hey, this is space opera, and it's really intriguing concepts and ideas, and it blew my mind. Okay, that doesn't tell you what the book is, but it gives you a little bit of a sense of it, that along with the title and who the author was, and maybe one other little thing that I might say to distinguish it from whatever I'm talking about next. I think that's going to have to do it, and I think that's fine, and that's probably expected for a list of 150. And then I guess the final thing that I'll say on that is, it was a lot of fun to put this list together. Again, it wasn't hard to get from 400 down to close to 150, but within the 150, I put that list together pretty quickly. It was easy to do the top 10. That was the first thing. I think like around 8, 9, 10 it started to get difficult, and then like what belongs in the top 20, there's a couple things around that like 20 to 40 range that all felt like it could be in the top 20. That was hard. And then rounding out the list and like, here's the mass of all the books that are going to be in the 150. Having that mass of books was not too difficult, but then actually the actual spot in the list is what I keep tinkering with and changing, because it does feel really important that this is going to be a big list and it's going to be out here on booktube, and I'm hopeful that people are going to look at it and comment on it and think about it and interact with me about the list and let me have it if their favorite is not high up on my list, or praise me because we have the same wonderful, beautiful taste in science fiction. But it was hard to look at things like, look at Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, and look how thick this book is. This is a big book. This book is brilliant. It's brilliantly written. The ideas are brilliant. And this book was written in 1999. Then we've got, I'm not going to remember the publication date on To Your Scattered Bodies Go. I wonder if I have it written down here somewhere. I think it was 58, 60, 70. I think it was in 58. But, this is a completely different, this is a really interesting story. It's very trippy, a lot different than this. And we've got, again, the Red Trilogy, which is action-packed, and, it's reads really fast. It's really enjoyable from that sense. And then we've got Mission Gravity, which is, really science heavy. This is one of I don't know that I'm going to call it one of the original hard science fiction books, but it often has the reputation of being one of the first real hard sci-fi books, talking about gravity and very science heavy, but also really wondrous. And those 4 books, these are all really different reading experiences. And on the list as it is right now, they're, the lowest ranked of these and the highest ranked of these 4 books are within maybe 30 spots on the list. So I could easily switch this and this, or this and this, from where they are right now, and they could move 15, 20, 30 spots in the rankings, and it still feels right. That's how close this is. These are all really good books. So I'm excited for this list, not because I'm saying, yeah, this is better than that. It's more acknowledging these are 150 really good books. And yes, number 1 is, to me, better than number 60. Number 20, to me, is better than number 110. But I did have a lot of fun doing it, but they're all really good books. So the next part of this is where and when. Where am I going to film this? When am I going to do it? How am I going to do all of that? So the one thing I'm really intimidated with this video is, with 150 books, I'm not going to do this all in one sitting. When I do a wrap-up, when I do a tag or a TBR or book haul, if I do a book review, I'm sitting down here, I'm doing it in one night, I'm taking all this stuff off, putting everything away, and I'm done for the night. With 150 books, I can't do that. And I'm a little nervous about that because this library is also my office, and I work in here. Sometimes the lights get moved around. Sometimes the kids get in here and they're pulling things out, and I'm the real organized one here, so I have drawers that are full of things that everybody sometimes needs and should be somewhere else in the house as well. But my set is always really well organized, so those drawers get picked through and things can get messy. So I'm nervous that I'll film one night and then I'll come back in and I change the lighting and you're watching, and then we go from number 80 to number 79, and then all of a sudden the lighting's a lot differently, or I've got a shadow here or a shadow here. Maybe I didn't shave as well that day. The books are probably going to be out of order in terms of what you see here. That can change a lot. I'm not so worried about that, but the audio could be a little different. So I'm a little nervous about all of those things. I think I'm just going to not be nervous about it and just decide whatever comes out, just worry about the content each time that I film. The other consideration I have is, do I want to film this on the green screen? I do have a green screen and I haven't used it yet, and I'm a little intimidated about that too. I need to try that out. I don't want this big 150 science fiction novels list to be the first time I do it and I'm making a dry run at it. So maybe I'll practice that a little bit. And then it doesn't matter if some of this changes as much, or maybe it doesn't matter if the lighting changes either. Then I'm thinking about what else do I have on the agenda, because I could see this project taking me another month or so, because I have my list together. I want to make sure I have all the publication dates correct for each book, because I probably want to mention that in the top 150, and correct spelling of the author's names, because I'm going to want to put that in. And then actually once I shoot too, the editing of this is going to take forever, because if I want to, I'll show the book cover here. I think I have most of the books that are on this list because I've read them, but some of the stuff that I read long ago, I might not have. I'm guaranteed to not have some of these titles, so I'm going to be putting up an image when I go to editing, and maybe I'll have to sit to the side so I can do that. Or if I'm the green screen, I can just put them in there, but that's a lot of time editing too. So in the meantime, I'm not just going to be working on this project. I'm still going to be doing reviews. Like I said, I'm reading Stranger or Strange Land right now. I've got Fire Upon the Deep going. I've got, if you watch my last video, if you didn't watch my last video, go and watch it and make sure that you subscribe and definitely click the notification bell because that's good for my channel and it's good for you because then I can bring you new content and YouTube can let you know when my content comes out. And where was I? If you watched my recent wrap-up, I talked about some of the books I'm going to be reading upcoming. Probably in the meantime, I'll get through a reread of Foundation. I think that's probably what I'm going to do next. I'm not sure. But again, I'm probably going to have 3 or 4 books that I read before I get this top 150 list out. So I'm going to be doing reviews for them. So that'll interfere with some of the filming for the top 150 list. I have a tag that I'm working on that I'm creating that's an original tag, and I'm really excited about that. I've been working on that one for a while. Not like, you know, full on working on it. It's just like I had the idea and I did some really cool things with it already. And then I just kind of shelved it for a little bit, but I'm going to be coming back to that and I want to work on that. And that is something that I'm going to use a lot of green screen for. So that's going to be fun. So I have to take all that into account as I'm putting this together. I'm even a little bit nervous about making this video because it makes it more real that I have to focus on this list even more than I was. And I was putting a good amount of time on it, but I don't want to do this video about, hey, I'm preparing for this video, and then you don't see it for 5 months. That's not something that I want to see happen. So that's where I am on this project. I'm really excited about it. I'd love also if you'd go into the comments section and talk about your favorite books. If you have like one favorite science fiction that really stands out for you, like, oh, Mike, I hope this is on your list because this is the best I've ever read, or hey, this is an underrated author or an underrated book that nobody's really talking about. I hope this is on your list, or is this on your list? Because you can say, is it on your list? And I'm probably not going to answer it before the video comes out. I'll probably give you the like, well, you got to watch the video and find out. But those are cool to hear. If you have a top 10 list, let me know that. Give me some context too, not to judge it, but like, you know, hey, I've not read a lot of science fiction, but maybe I've read 10 and here they are in order, my top 10. Or, hey, Mike, I've read a lot more than you've read. 400 books, I've read 1,000. I know people have read 1,000 science fiction books, and that's cool. I hope to read 1,000 science fiction books because I love science fiction and I'm gonna keep reading it, so I'll get there eventually too. And tell me, here's my top 10, because that's gonna be a really cool list because I can see where that all came from. But again, that's not necessarily better than the person who read 10 and I get to see their 10. So, and I'm not the arbiter of what is a good list. It helps me because just like I'm putting out this list of 150 because I want to hopefully present some ideas of books for people to read that I loved and hopefully they will love too. Maybe there's books on your list that even if you've only read 10 books or 3 books, maybe it's 3 books that I haven't read. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in 2021, 1918, 2018, 2019 that I haven't read. I haven't read a lot of the new stuff because I'm going through all of my rereads. There's a few new things I read each year, but certainly not everything that's come out. So I'll be curious to see everybody else's lists. And then just for a little bit of fun, I did get one particular stat that I figured I'd talk about. I think after I do the video of my top 150, maybe I'll do another video sort of like this, but it'll sort of be a wrap up for that or a post-mortem maybe, and talk about a lot of the statistics of the list. But one statistic that I'll leave with today is the publication dates for the books on the list. So right now I've got 150, and these numbers as I give them to you are not going to add up to 150. I guarantee you, because I just like eyeballed it and jotted these numbers down. And just randomly, I put them in these categories. In the 1800s, I have 6 books that were written in the 1800s that are on this top 150. You know that Frankenstein's one of them because I showed that book at the beginning. I have 20-ish titles from 1900 to 1960. Okay, so that time period might be a little underrepresented, but I would say my reading is strong in terms of the really well-known stuff in that time and some of the lesser known. But of the really lesser known stuff between 1900 and 1960, there's probably a big gap. And that person we were talking about who read 1,000 science fiction, that not really a person we're talking about, I just made that person up, but that person does exist. A number of those people exist. That's probably where they've read a lot of stuff that I haven't read. From the 60s to the 70s, 30-ish titles. From the 80s to the 90s, 30-ish titles. The first decade of 2000, so like 2000 to 2010-ish, 25 titles. And then the second date up until present, the second decade up until present, so from like 2010-ish on to now, another 30 titles. So that is a little bit more heavily represented, which shouldn't be surprising to anybody. But that's a kind of a nice breakdown if you think about it. You know, okay, 6 titles from the 1800s. There's not a lot of science fiction to pull from there. But the 1900s to 1960s, we've got 20, and then we've got 30 in the next category, 30 in the next category, 25 in the next category, 30 in the next category. I didn't do that on purpose. That's how it came about. So I hope you're excited for this list. I'm really excited to put it out there, and please enjoy it. Thank you for watching this episode today. I'm so excited to put this list together. I'd love to hear any comments or ideas that you have or suggestions you might have for what might make this a more interesting list or interesting video beyond just what is the content of the list, meaning what books are on the list. Thank you for watching today. I'm Michael Everts. This is Fit to be Read.